Therefore, there was no time for teaching people. There was no time for people slacking behind, or if you didn't fit in with the game, you were basically a pain. So it was very difficult for me, a young 18-year-old, coming from so far. My experience of being in kitchen has just been great and fun. And then being into a place where someone is going to scream in your face because you've not put the parsley in the right place in the fridge.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession. The Burnt Chef Journal is proudly sponsored by Planday, the workforce management system that helps your business give a shift. From scheduling rotas ahead to tracking time and attendance, managing your team's careers to managing your budgets, Planday has everything you need to make your day work in one easy-to-use platform. Try it yourself with a 30-day free trial only at planday.com. Get your shift together with Planday.
Hello.
Nathan.
How you going, all right?
Not too bad, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, good. There you go. Can you see me now? I don't know what. I'm not sure it's coming up. Technology and all that.
Oh, mate, honestly. You'd think we were in the storeroom, I see.
Yeah. Well, that's a shelf in my kitchen at home, but yeah, it looks like a storeroom. You're in the storeroom too, and you're like, oh no, your office and storeroom.
No, this is my house too. This is how I live.
Excellent.
Yeah, so this is sort of the hub. Yeah, something that started off as a good idea suddenly took shape and form and then ended up just becoming a messy room, really.
Yeah.
Sort of.
You're doing amazing things. I've been reading all the stuff and listening to all the podcasts and that. It's really good. So I think the industry really needed something like it, to be honest with you. I mean, you've got hospitality action and things, all that sort of stuff, but they don't really deal so much with the mental health, do they? So that side of it, not as much. So.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it's good to hear, especially from people like yourself and seeing other people get on board as well. It's a fine line to tread, though, isn't it, really, at the end of the day? Because you don't want to make it too much a case of like we're creating an industry of snowflakes and people who just aren't able to stand the heat of a kitchen for any more than 5 minutes at a time. But also, it's been so overlooked for so many years that it's starting to, I believe it's going to cause a long-term impact to the industry, and I want that to turn around and for more people to come back into it, and also for people to stop taking their own lives as well, because it's just...
Yeah, I mean, that sort of stuff, to get to that stage, like over something, because, well, a lot of people just consider it as just a job, you know what I mean? To get to that stage, to be like, I just can't comprehend, I mean, it's mental, that sort of stuff, but... I mean, obviously, talking about it is the way forward. So you've got to sort of, that's why it's so good. The industry really needs to know. It is a tough industry, and it always has been. I think always will be to some extent. I don't think you can never get, like you said, can't be snowflakes, because otherwise, nothing's going to get done. So there is that element of it. It's just the way you go about it. So I've never felt the need to be an arsehole. So like in terms of being in the kitchen, so I don't, I've obviously worked with people that are arseholes in my junior years, but in terms of actually being so, I just don't. It's not productive, and it's never worked. So I've never done it. I know plenty of stories, and I've been in plenty of positions to see what can be like.
Yeah,
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, I'd like to be able to say that I'm a chef. I do believe that there's pride. I'd love to be able to say that I know what I'm doing within the kitchen environment. But I think one of the reasons why I've been able to do what I do is because whilst I've worked front of house, so I spent 2 years working in a very busy bar, but I've been from a different side of hospitality. So I've actually been from the supply side. I spent sort of the best part of almost 12 years supplying fine dining ingredients to restaurants all across the Southwest. Unfortunately, not as far as Cornwall and Devon, but, it's given me an insight. I mean, I've worked with must be thousands of chefs quite closely over an extended period of time. And it's given me an insight into what they go through and how they operate and what a kitchen environment's like. But I don't have that restriction upon myself in terms of ego or in terms of pride or in terms of a reputation to uphold. Like, if this completely and utterly failed in the early days, for me, I wouldn't have had to walk back into a kitchen and go, there we go, I tried to do something and I've ended up fucking it up, So I guess I'm quite lucky, but also in the same respect, whilst I've seen firsthand the effects the kitchen and a hospitality environment have, I've obviously experienced mental health issues myself, but not brought on specifically by working in the kitchen.
Mm.
So bit of a wolf, not a wolf in sheep's clothing, but like a Trojan horse in some ways. I feel like a bit of a
Yeah.
charlatan, but what I'm doing is hopefully going to benefit the industry, and it's going to benefit people's lives. And
Good on you for getting up and doing something, because like it should have been done way before now. It's really bringing that attention to it.
thank you.
Yeah.
So, Nathan, I'm intrigued because whilst I've eaten at your place, Padstow is like a second home to me. I absolutely bloody love the area, and I love everything around that area. It's, in fact, we're coming back there in August, so I'll come and dine with you then, if things get back to normal. I'm touching wood. But just talk to me a little bit about sort of your journey, because obviously I know that you've worked with some quite influential people within the industry, and you've touched upon the fact that you've worked also in some places that perhaps haven't done things in necessarily the right way. And I'm interested to learn a little bit more about your backstory, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you want to start from the beginning, or?
I know you've got family ties in the industry. How did you decide that this career was going to be the career for you, despite seeing the?
I think the earlier sort of time. I'm talking when I was probably 5, 6, that sort of age. I mean, I used to obviously see my father coming home being a chef, and the pride and the sort of. It is definitely a pride that he had in his work. He wasn't doing what I'm doing, or doing he wasn't cooking at a high end in terms of like what the public perceived to be high end. He was cooking in like what he calls them glorified canteens, but contract catering. So he was doing that sort of thing, but it was a massive scale. He was doing 2,000 lunches, private directors dining, evening events, weekend events for all the employees of this big paper company, because it was like they had a big club and everything. And I was lucky enough to be dragged along with him, especially at the weekends. I mean, I used to do Saturday mornings, like just because I loved getting up and doing it and doing the breakfast shift and stuff with him. And I shouldn't have been there. It's like totally illegal, like, totally against the rules. But it was, I think, because I didn't get in the way, and because I did just get on with, I weren't pissing around. I'd get on with what I was asked to do, even at a young age. I just love being part of that. And I think that the camaraderie, and I suppose the early signs of things that shouldn't have happened, that when you're young, you think, well, that's quite funny. Do you know what I mean? Like someone's being told, someone's being whipped with a cloth or something like that. You're an 8-year-old kid. You're like, well, that's quite funny, right? But realise later in life that's not. But you should, even if I think, because ever since I said to come and talk to you, I was like, been thinking about all the things that would have just went by the by. And you just sort of, you accepted. So the things like, people had like nicknames and stuff like that, which if I'm thinking back at it, weren't very nice. I mean, even an 8-year-old kid, I can remember that sort of stuff. So, but I think from the excitement point of view and the adrenaline and the sort of like, and then people actually turning around as customers and saying, thank you very much, that was a lovely breakfast, or thanks very much, that sort of thing. I thought, this is really, really cool. And also I'm quite artistic in terms of, I love drawing and I love animation and things like that. And if I hadn't been a chef, that's probably where the route I would have gone down. But I could mix that in with cooking, and I saw that there was an artistic side to it. So very early on, my jobs were, and it's only simple things, and it would look terribly naff now, but it was like, just laying up salads for a big function of 500, but making them looking and making sure they're all consistent and looking lovely. And even at that age, I would try and put the cucumber in the right place and make sure the radish sat in the right place and things like that. Like Van Dyke in tomatoes and things like that. Like, it's so naff, but it was just that I always try to get it right. So that always spoke to me as a kid. There was a profession where A, I didn't have to sit down. B, I didn't have to do any writing. This is what I thought when I was younger. But I could just do practical things like have fun, cook, and people enjoyed it. And that was really, I heard, so it was the basis of reason why I became a chef. I had no clue. And you're talking, this is 80s, right? Early 80s. I would have been in the kitchen with my dad. So there was no celebrity chefs. There was no like TV chefs. There was not that I knew of, and you didn't buy cookery books. So it wasn't that part of the industry that made me want to be a chef. I didn't have a clue that there was awards and accolades and all that sort of stuff for it. I didn't have no clue. And it wasn't actually until I became a chef and started in London that I actually realised that there was you could get prizes for being a chef. I didn't have a clue. Yeah. So it was coming into being a chef was purely, it's in me, and that's what my grandparents they all had links to working in local hotels in the Maidstone area where I come from. And then my mum was, she's a teacher now, but before, the end days, you weren't if you were a female, you weren't meant to be a teacher. You had to just look after the kids. So she looked after me and my brother, but then later on became a teacher. But while she was looking after us, she worked in hotels and she did catering as well, and youth work actually. So I think that's where I get from both of my parents. I mean, one's a chef and one's a teacher, and the youth work and all that sort of stuff. So I've got best of both worlds from them really. And I sort of like, I love to teach, I do give a shit about people, and I love cooking. So that's pretty much me. So, and then when I actually, because I'd been cooking for so long, I started like cooking, I suppose, and getting paid for it when I was like 14 years old in a local pub. And that was just really for pocket money, and but again, it was a different environment. Again, it was fun, it was fast, and it wasn't one of them places where you prep everything from scratch. We were opening tins and we were opening packets, and that was the way it was. I say it wasn't really until I done college, and I got to college when I was 16 and went to Thanet College, which is now called East Kent College in Broadstairs. And it wasn't until I really got in there. I mean, I had a good understanding of the kitchen because of my dad, but I didn't realise that there was this real sort of French foundation to the cooking that was being done at that point. And sort of that's when I sort of started realising there's a lot more to it than what I'd seen so far. So I was sort of engulfed in the college, but I wasn't that interested in college. And in terms of, I wasn't a star pupil, I was truant, and I did sort of like go to the pub with my mates and didn't get lessons. But I blasted through it because I was lucky enough to have had all the experience like before that, which is totally the wrong way to look at it, but and I'd love to have taken more in, but I got through it very easily because I was very fortunate to have been in kitchens for such a long time. So it was just a matter of learning the French stuff. It was a matter of learning all the Escoffier stuff, and and that was it really. But the actual cooking, going into a classroom and they'd say make a parsley sauce, I'd probably done it 10 times already before with my dad. So so you straight away, I suppose it's like anything. If you don't have to, you already know it, you sort of disregard it because it's almost, you're young and you're stupid and you're not really thinking like an adult, and you thought, I know all this, and it was that sort of attitude, you know what I mean? And it was actually, looking back at it, I would probably have been a bit of an idiot really. So for the lecturers, it should be so.
I'm glad you said that. Oh, colleges everywhere are going, oh shit, all the students are banned from this podcast episode. They're all being told to go down the pub, get pissed, and do weekend work. But
I mean, ever since being more recently, I was involved in colleges, and I got Cornwall College, and we had an academy for 6 years there, which unfortunately is not, because of funding, is not happening now. But I mean, the importance of college is very important. I was just fortunate or unfortunate, whichever way you put it, to have already known. But there's a lot, the way I see it when I've been involved in colleges, you have young people or people changing their career and that are at different points in their life. And I think that college gives you that foundation and that grounding to actually go into a proper kitchen or a proper hotel, because if you don't have it, you're going to struggle, and then it's going to be a nightmare for you. So I believe in colleges, and I think colleges will, it's just a funding thing. They're strapped for cash, and it's like anything. It's until the government see it as a serious occupation and a serious industry, it will never be funded correctly.
Which is balmy. Like with 3.8 million people within this industry, I mean, hopefully that remains the case after COVID. But with so many people, the third largest industry in the UK, bigger than other like aeronautical industries and other industries like that, and the government still look at it as a stopgap career. It's just. Yeah, it's loopy, but I'll get started on a tangent. You carry on. Otherwise, ranting.
I agree with you completely. I think it's bad. But so I did college, and then all the time we were at college, all the lecturers were telling us, you got to go to London, you got to work in a London hotel 5-star place. So I did what everyone else did at that time. We all applied for, the Ritz, the Dorchester places, the Savoy, and you would go up and do like a day's work or a morning's work with them and stuff. That was a good insight actually first. So I went to Savoy. Dorchester just didn't even give me a reply at the time. Bearing this is 1996, I think, probably about 1995. Because at that time there was queues of young chefs outside wanting a job. It wasn't like it is now. It was like, I know that I went for a second comedy job, but I eventually worked at the Intercontinental and Hyde Park Corner, which was, it's a 5-star hotel. I know that 6 commis chefs, a second commis, so below commis, went for that job. So now you could just walk into them jobs, and it wouldn't be students from colleges. It would be like it wouldn't be ethnic. It would be people from different countries. It wouldn't be, white English or people necessarily coming from colleges like we all were. It's like everyone was going for these jobs. And there was only so many of these jobs available. And that's why people like the Ritz didn't reply to me. Deutsche didn't reply to me. Savoy, I went and did an interview with Anton Edelman, who's a chef there at the time, but I just got forgotten about in the corner of the kitchen, peeling aubergines. I remember peeling aubergines. I was like doing boxes and boxes for a banquet that they must have had. And then the Intercontinental was the only place that I got in there. And as a young, I was 17 at the time, so they actually took time, care, and the chef there was a guy called Peter Kronberg, who unfortunately is not with us anymore. He was just, I thought this is the place, because the actual kitchen was so diverse. Mm-hmm. I'd seen that Savoy was very much French and English chefs. That was always in the kitchen, and a few German chefs. I went into the Intercontinental and it was so diverse: Japanese, Thai, Filipino, obviously European, but the European chefs were more in the fine dining, and the rest of the world was sort of like in what it's called the lobby lounge, and there was a cafe and stuff. And there was two options. You go in the French fine dining. It lost its Michelin star. I didn't know what Michelin. I know now, but I didn't know that had happened. So I was just like, there's a lot of grumpy French chefs in that kitchen. I wonder why they're grumpy. I don't know. So I was like, I'm going to go and work. I said, they offered you like 2 roles. I said, I'd love to work with all the guys from, because I could see there's this amazing Japanese chef that was doing some really cool things. And there's this Thai guy who was making these beautiful curries. And I'd never seen any of that food. Like, that was like, never ever seen that sort of food in my life. So I went and worked in that, and then didn't bother with the fine dining. So I was there for probably about 18 months in total. And then my father, he was working for Sodexo, which was Gardner Merchant, and they'd just done a deal with Gary Rhodes to open his first restaurant. Because I had that link of Sodexo, Gardner Merchant, Gary Rhodes, and I knew of him, I sort of went for a job as a commis chef at his new restaurant that was opening in Holborn called City Roads. I got the job off of the back of my CV, like coming from the same college as Gary Rhodes, being a boy from Kent, working at the Intercontinental, which they knew good chefs would come from. And I didn't even do an interview, so I went straight in there. And first day I was in the kitchen, right? And it was brand new, opened on, it was the opening day. And it was just a massive shock, because I'd never experienced a Michelin-starred restaurant. I never experienced a restaurant that was so focused and so military, and everything was done. I was just like, too much shocks for the system. I worked my hardest, but I walked out after 3 months. I was like, I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, it was literally too much for me. So, and I think looking back at it now, Gary was up, he rung me a few times, and I saw him before he passed away, actually, in Dubai. And, he was like, you turned out all right in the end, didn't you? Like, so I said, yeah, I did. But the point was that the kitchen was it was my first experience of going into a kitchen where they had their own little clique of chefs. And if you didn't fit in with that, you were basically just abused, right? And shouted at and treated like shit, given all the bad jobs. And it wasn't Gary, don't get me wrong. He was like, I'm sure he was, the senior guys were aware of it. It was just the way that was run. That was just the way that kitchen was run. And I know now, because I've obviously run kitchens, it was down to the pressure of how much the output they were putting from the kitchen, and the standard they were putting it out. So therefore there was no time for teaching people. There was no time for people slacking behind, or if you didn't fit in with the gang, you were basically a pain. So it was very difficult for me, a young 18-year-old, coming from, so far my experience of being in kitchen has just been great and fun. And then being into a place where someone is going to scream in your face because you've not put the parsley in the right place in the fridge. So that sort of thing was too much for me at that age. And mentally, like, I suppose looking back at it, it was just like living on my own in London for the first time, away from my parents, not having any money, because you had no money at that stage of your career, being a commis chef, and then going into work to just be abused and be shouted at, and just to be like, have no fun at all. There was no fun in there, right? What I mean? So, but saying that, there was lessons to be learned from it. There was things I pulled away from that, working in that restaurant, that I still keep with me now, that I still use now. So I wouldn't say, looking back at it, once I'd walked away from it, and probably about a year later, I think I could have handled it longer. just feeling sorry for myself and being young, I suppose, but it was just a bit much. So I went back to the Intercontinental Hotel, and Peter Kronberg he almost told me that would happen. He's a wise chef, and he sort of didn't say you're not ready for it, but he sort of said, "Oh, I'll see you soon," sort of thing, as if to say, I know what's going to happen.
Knowing look.
So I went back with my tail between the legs, I suppose, in a little way, and then just went back in the same place and working hard, doing night shifts and everything at 18 years old. And, I just loved it. But then a friend of mine told me about a really exciting chef called Eric Chauveau, who I knew nothing about, was opening a restaurant in Fulham Road. And it was going to be like, he was telling me that this guy's the best chef, in the country. He's going to, this restaurant's going to be the greatest and stuff like that. So he set me up stages, because of the Intercontinental, we were doing 8-hour days. He wasn't doing 16-hour days. You had like shifts. I had always had evenings or mornings off. So what I started doing was going and working, doing like sort of work experience with Eric Chauveau, and in between working at the Intercontinental as well. I did that for about 3 months until a job came up. And all the time I did that, it was just a bit more of it wasn't as a hard smash into the kitchen like it was a Gary Rose. It was like an introduction to it. So it was hard, and Eric is an amazing chef, and he's a tough chef as well. You don't come from a background that he's from and not be tough. And the reason why I did well in that kitchen was because I kept my mouth shut and I was good. I did what I was told, and it was only really the ones that got in trouble were the ones that give me a bit of lip back or did turn up late. I just learned my lesson from working for Gary, and then lick my wounds back at the Intercontinental, and then slowly introduce myself back into that environment. But I knew I wanted to cook food of that level. I wanted to cook the best food, So, and Eric at the time, when he opened Chauveau in Fulham Road, that food he was cooking there, it never got to a chance to get to 2 or 3 Michelin-starred because it went out of business within less than a year, right? So that's when I lost. Obviously, I worked there for that time, and then he announced that, we're closing, guys, because we're going out of business. And so then that's when I decided that London was enough. I had enough of London, and I sort of, as a child, I'd always gone to Cornwall on holiday. So I sort of decided that I'm going to go and move out of London. So a friend of mine, so the same friend that introduced me to Eric Chauveau was a group of friends that they'd all worked together at the Savoy Grill, and there's about 4 of them. And they're all in like the sous chef sort of level. And they all taught. And basically a friend of a friend knew someone that was in Rick Stein's seafood restaurant as a sous chef. So he got me an interview. So I jumped on the train and then just went down to Paddington and did a couple of days trial at the seafood restaurant, and just straight away loved it. I was like, this kitchen is like for me. Because I've been working on fish stations, on fish sections in all the kitchens that I've been in. And I was like, that's what I love. And I was like, well, if I'm going to learn how to do it, at the time, this was like, say 1998, I think it was. It was like he was just on TV with his second series, and it was just like he was the man, he was the fish guy, right? So I was like, if I'm going to learn how the best fish, I've got to go and work for Rick Stein. So I went down there, did my day's trial, and they gave me a job. Came back to London, did my month's notice with Eric, and I think I'm the only person that ever did a month's notice. I think most people just went. I did that, and I think I've seen Eric in more recent times, and he sort of. He remembers me as this big, lanky, like sort of 18, 19-year-old, and not really much else really. But he always does. We have a laugh. So, but that was a tough kitchen. But going into the seafood restaurant, it was just sort of like a revelation for me, because it was like, again, it was busy. Like the most covers I've ever done. We were doing 140, 150 of an evening service, 100 for lunch. I think they do more than that now. I think they do 200 and something now. But it was just quite a close team. And Rick was a different sort of teacher in that he was traveling. He was traveling all over the world doing his shows and then bringing back all his ideas. So the inspiration came from seeing, when he had new ideas, he would fax a recipe through, because the faxes then, it wasn't no email. We'd like the head chef, Paul Ripley, who's a very good friend of mine. I come down from the office with a new recipe that Rick was in Australia, and he just sort of, come up with a new dish. Basically, he nicked a dish.
Borrowed, been influenced by.
Yeah. He's a little, Rick is, he's a self-confessed magpie anyway. He always says that he picks up things from all over the world. But, you just saw such a diverse repertoire of different things. and different foods, and using different ingredients as well. I mean, I was straight away using ingredients from Asia that I'd never used before, using cooking techniques for the fish that I'd never done before, using fish I'd never used before, seeing that as a complete going back to school. And at that time when I worked there, everything was done on site. I mean, I think now they got to a size where they have a prep area, but we were doing everything. So it was, when an order come on Freedom Air, you cooked it. It wasn't already done. You got it done. And, when fish, an order came on for a bass, you take it out of the fish and fillet it, and then you pass it over to the guy who's cooking it. So the process was actually quite unorganized, I suppose, looking at it, but organized at the same time.
Sorry, just very quickly, because you're talking about recipes from all over the world is incredibly inspiring, and as a young chef as well, that must be awesome. But when these recipes are coming through with things like finger limes on them, how are you guys going, right, okay, I've got the recipe from Australia, but how the hell do we get hold of these ingredients? Or were you adapting it to fit what was available within the local area?
Yeah, I think a lot of Rick's earlier recipes are adapted. So obviously the ingredients aren't available. So finger limes, I never saw a finger lime there. But the things that we saw that were, there's a lot of dried chilies, because obviously you could either get them himself and bring them back, or you could get them over. And things that, just ingredients like vinegars and oils and things that just weren't I'd never seen in a kitchen before or tasted. So I tasted a lot of different things. Yeah, I mean, Rick adjusted a lot of the recipes that he saw around the world to make sure that we could cook them in padstow. So, yeah, and I think being part of that, it wasn't the early process because the restaurant had already been open for 20 odd years when I started there, right? It's now been, I think they're 44th year or something like that, so which is amazing. So I had a new start when I started there because they had a new kitchen built. It was like a third or fourth stage of a growth. I think they're on to like 10 or 12 now. Yeah. So they've grown and grown. And so it was just, and then also the kitchen, it was non-stop. I mean, there was never a time, like you say, about going for like your welfare side of it. It was just because I was young and hungry and just wanted to do it that I never even thought about the negative side. I never thought about, we always actually did get a break in the afternoon and things like that working at Rick. So you go surfing or you do something like that, which was great. But you're still doing long hours, and it was tough. But I think I don't have any, from that kitchen, I don't have any negative thing to say about it. It was just positive. But I suppose if you were a bit more a snowflake, like you said, a bit more there would be things that you'd be like, that's pretty tough. But because it was just everything that I loved about food, but also an environment where you're learning so much, if you had the ability to take from it.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was great. I wouldn't have left there until the head chef, Paul, basically said, you're good. You need to look at other things as well, because you need to go and see other things. And, Rick hated that. Rick didn't want me to go. I think that they might have had a bit of a falling out over that but at the time. But it was just that there's a lot more to learn from other things. And I suppose you could get just stuck into it would have become very easy for me. It would have become really, it would just become a bit of a, I suppose you could see me getting into a bit of a rut maybe if I continued for a long time. So I did that for 2 years, 2 solid years. And for, I suppose, for the next 10 years after, I always thought about going back there. I really thought about, even when I opened my first restaurant, I still thought about going to work back with Rick because I thought it was, because the environment was good. And I suppose it was quite an easy life as well. You know what I mean? And that's, so them two things are quite inviting. And so when you're working, when well, the next move was going to work in the Cotswolds at Lords of the Manor with John Campbell, who is a great, very, very intelligent and great chef. But that was tough, going from working in that environment with Rick and going and surfing in your split and having your 3 days off a week, and and then going into working into a country house hotel that was aiming for big things, but was in the shit for staff, and we were working 6-7 day weeks and stuff like that. You sort of kept thinking back to Padstow, thinking, actually, it might be quite good to go back there. I realised myself that I needed to, I was hungry for more. And that's when I started doing things like competitions as well. So I started doing the Academy Culinary, which is like the Awards of Excellence, which is basically an exam run by the Academy of Culinary Arts, which I passed that, which is great. And I suppose that's where them sort of things is where you start getting noticed on a more of a national level, because you sort of, the caterer are there, journalists are there, and they sort of, if you win or you just stick out and you get to meet people. So I suppose that's where people started knowing of what I do myself. And then working for John Campbell, John at the time, working at Lords of the Manor, John took that place from being just one of them places in the Cotswolds where people come and stay and by the coach load, to making it like one of the best country house hotels going. That's that point. And this would have been 2001, I suppose, that sort of time. And it was brilliant working with John. John was hard. He was a hard taskmaster, but he worked as hard as everyone else. So it wasn't like someone shouting at you and go and sit in their office. He was like, he'd cook, he'd do every section, anything needs making, he was there as well. So, and it was nice to work with John at that stage, because it was at a time where he was doing that sort of stuff. I mean, now he's still cooking now, like the wood speed, I think. And I think that was, for me, he honed all my skills. So like the cooking bit was, I could cook. I think I could cook quite well. It was the refinement, and it was also the organisation of the kitchen. Mm-hmm. So I suppose because I was only 21, must have been 21, 22, and he had faith in to give me a sous chef position at that age, which is completely. And looking back at the reason why he gave it to me is because there was no one else wanting to take it as well. It was hard to find a sous chef, right? I probably should have been in there, and I was junior sous chef at the seafood restaurant, and I suppose my CV was quite good, and I think, looking at it, I think John would have probably young and inexperienced, but experienced in other ways. So he took a punt on me and made me sous chef. So I was his sous chef for the 2 years until John left the Lords of the Manor. And then I came back to Cornwall and actually set up a restaurant with Paul Ripley, who was the head chef at the seafood restaurant called Ripley's, which I was there. And John asked me to come back as head chef at the Vineyard at Scott Cross. So I went back again to work with John and did really, it was, when we took over the Vineyard at Stock Cross, it really was about being organised. We had to forget about the food for a minute and just get the whole place organised, because it was a bit of a beast. You were doing big functions every day, like 100 plus of like lunch times and dinner times, plus a 70, 80 cover restaurant that was was doing fine dining, plus office meetings and then breakfast. It was a full-on operation, but they were charging top dollar for everything. So the expectation was super high. And being in Newbury, in that area, there's a lot of money in that area, so people were expecting a lot. So I mean, the first thing we need to do is organise it. So I think John used me I knew his repertoire and I knew his cooking, so I was like in the kitchen doing the cooking and making sure the kitchen and the chefs were doing their stuff, while John had to get everything else organised and then start moving things forward. So John went on to get 2 Michelin stars there. I only stayed there for a year because my wife and I decided we wanted to have a kid. And we wanted Rachel, my wife, she's from Padstow, so we wanted to move back to Cornwall. So against every piece of advice that everyone gave me, I decided to open my own restaurant with my in-laws in 2003, the Black Pig, and I was 24 years old. And they were basically all, everyone told me not to. And the managing director of the Vineyard offered me an extra 10 grand on my salary to say, don't do that. And John didn't speak to me for a long time after that as well. He we didn't fall out, but he just he was just annoyed that I was going. And so I understand that. But that's one lesson I've learned from that. I'm never like that with my chefs who leave me, or with people that leave me. I'm sort of like, we always stay in touch. So I went and opened the Black Pig. So I was 24, and that was just purely down to knowing that I could do it. And I had my own self-belief that I could cook well and that I wanted to cook my own food, and I didn't want to be part of a huge operation, which was, still you get paid well in, stupidly. So I went from having, I'd say, 20 staff under me in Vineyard kitchen down to just me on my own in the kitchen. And for the first 3 or 4 weeks I was on my own, and then I was lucky enough to get a commie chef that was working for Rick Stein, who was wanting to leave and come and work with me. So it's just me and this young lad, Michael, who's now actually lives in New York and's been there for the last 15 years. But that was a completely different world. But I got a chance to cook my food, for the first time. So Rachel, I think we opened on May the 20th, and Jacob, my son, was born on May the 6th. Our first kid. And because I wasn't technically employed, no one in the area would give us a house to rent because I had no salary, right? So we were living in my wife's brother's spare bedroom with a newborn baby, with a restaurant opening 10 days later. It's just, I wouldn't say, it's not for the faint-hearted, that sort of thing.
No, I mean, Christ, that's, I mean, it's hard enough opening up a business and trying to run a business and juggle that. I mean, bearing in mind, you're used to looking after staff, but then also running financials of a business, working the business plans, doing the front of house, looking after lease agreements and all that other stuff. Oh, and we'll just add a newborn child onto it as well.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
life is rosy. It's fine. I can handle it.
And I think you can only do that when you're young like that, because you don't got the experience to put doubt into your mind.
Yeah.
And I think as if you'd have said, me and my wife were talking about, if we'd had children now, and I'm 43 and Rachel's 41, and a lot of our friends are still having children, and I said, you just wouldn't do it if you knew what you knew. So, but when you're younger like that, you just do things because you just feel like you believe you can do it. And that was like having a family, opening a restaurant, coming away from a secure job. It was all because I believed that I could actually do it, and say in terms of success, I mean, in the restaurant was very successful, and even though it was in a seasonal area, the winter time was pretty tough, and it was like anything in Cornwall back then. It wasn't like how busy it is now. It was very dead for probably 4 or 5 months, really. But in the summer times and the busy times, we did really, really well. And within 8 months, we got a Michelin star. So that's when I think people started to recognise what we were doing, because I was 25. Opening a restaurant that was like in the arse end of nowhere at that point, really. And then Michelin acknowledged that we were worthy of a star, like out of the blue. So, and that was completely out of the blue. I mean, I'd not written to them, sent menus to them, done any of that stuff that people do now when they open a restaurant. It was just, I don't know how, it must have been through doing the competitions and doing that sort of stuff. And the caterer, when we opened the Black Pig restaurant in Rock, the caterer had done a little report on it, like a little bit, that little small bit about it, so, and I think that they must just read that sort of stuff and then got wind of it.
If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, wellbeing journals, plus a whole host more available on worldwide dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free to access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health. Sometimes now people are looking out for the Michelin inspectors. They know when they walk in, and they're brazen enough to be able to go and ask. I did hear a rumour that you served a profiterole to a Michelin inspector. Is that true?
I've been serving profiteroles for all the time, so probably. I do. Yeah, sometimes amazing. I mean, the thing is, like, the Michelin sort of phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, the circus of Michelin is I don't think anyone actually knows, unless you are in a circle of inspectors. I mean, I've even met people from Michelin that don't work for the inspectors, but work for the tyre company or high up in certain things, and they ain't got a clue. They don't know nothing about it. They don't know nothing about it. Even the press guy, I once spoke to the guy who's in charge of press rooms, and he said, I ain't got a clue. They just don't. I think it must be such an inner circle. But my view on it, it's got to be down from, I've had 8 restaurants where I've won 1 star. Like 8 restaurants in the times from the Black Pig until the Outlaws New Road this year. It's been 8 restaurants where we've got 1 star. So the only thing from that experience of achieving that accolade, I can only put down to what I've been putting on the plate and how we've been doing the restaurant. So I can say 100% it's got to be down to the food. It's got to be down to what's on the plate, because it's always been that consistency. I still cook dishes that are from the Black Pig in 2003 that I'm still cooking them now. So maybe they've changed slightly, but it's still the same format, like same sort of what I think is right about food and what I can do. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I actually think there's the sad side of the whole accolades, not just Michelin, but all of it, is the pressure it puts on chefs, or the pressure it puts under chefs that get employed to get those awards. So like, you get a job, what's part of your job as a head chef when you see the adverts? We want to achieve this, we want to achieve that, or, part of your contract is that you achieve these accolades by a certain time. I mean, what the fuck is that all about? How can you're asking someone to do something that's completely out of their control? You could be cooking 364 days a year, you're cooking perfect food, and then that extra one day, you had a bad day, and that's the day they eat. that's the luck of the draw, isn't it?
And
So
to structures that you don't even recognise or don't even know. It's not like Rosette where you go, right, I have to be doing X, Y, and Z. Something like a Michelin, it's like, I don't know, I'd let my finger put it in the air and put some, put some nice textures on the plate. Like,
I've always been very fortunate. I mean, I got the 2 stars with restaurant Nathan Outlaw, and we've done very well with like the Good Food Guide and with 10 out of 10 and #1 and things like that. But even with that, I mean, I've been very honest about it. I sort of know I've met a few Good Food Guide inspectors and I've had chats to them because they're more like journalists, right? They're not necessarily as much inspectors. You sort of get, but you can no way cook off of the back of a conversation of what you've had with them. There's no way you can go extract information from a chat over saying, hello, how was your meal? Or hello, how are you? How are you having a nice day? So it's a certain amount of, they're very different, I think, in guys, and in AA is different as well. We got 4 rosettes because obviously it fits, like you said, the criteria, but I've never really had big conversations with them in my career with working. I've not, I've done the AA dinner, the big hotel gala dinner thing that they do, and I cooked for that. But even then, I didn't talk to an inspector. They didn't introduce themselves as an inspector anyway. Or maybe I spoke to someone, and I got AA Chef of the Year one year, which is voted by all the chefs, all the people that are in it. So that was quite nice. I think I've always just been lucky enough to just believe that I've been happy enough with what I've been cooking and how our restaurant's running. And then the other stuff's just all come on top. But I do feel bad about, I feel sorry. No, I'm empathetic to the people that worry about all that all the time. I think it must be a nightmare.
It raises an interesting point, actually, because there's a lot of people who believe that you have to sacrifice mind, body, and soul in order to be able to get these accolades and to be able to maintain Michelin. And obviously, from the sound of things, from your journey from where you've worked in some places that are quite brutal in terms of how they maintain that level of perfection, to being able to achieve 2 Michelin stars and a Michelin star in 8 different venues, you must have found this balance of being able to, not constantly sacrifice everything to be able to uphold those standards. I mean, what's the secret? Like, how do you do it?
I feel I'm lucky. I think probably the most stressful time I've ever had in my whole career, in my life, was back on that first lockdown. And that was nothing to do with accolades. It has to do with the pressure everybody else was under. But in terms of the accolades, and I think I just got that thought of like, it's not the end of the world. That's why I always think about it. At the end of the day, I'm not going to say it hasn't helped me, because it massively has helped the way that, the trajectory of my business and my own sort of like place in the industry in terms of what, the things the opportunities I get and the things I get asked to do, which is lovely. And that all helps. That's part of that media world, that cycle that goes around. But
yeah,
I like to think that I've always kept true to just cooking the food that I love cooking and that I think that customers want to eat. So I've never sat down and analysed any of the accolades and thought, all right, I need to do this, this, and this to get this accolade. It's never been. In fact, we in the kitchen now, as we currently stand, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. We don't talk. Even if I know there's an inspector in the kitchen or the front of house give me a nod that someone, there might be someone who's inspector. I don't tell. No one knows. I don't tell the chefs. No one knows about it, because I just don't think it's not fair to put them guys under that pressure. They might see the pressure of it. Like they might, don't know how their mind works. And that's not what I employ anybody for. I employ people to come and have fun and cook, learn and enjoy themselves and give our customers the best time that they can have. I don't employ them to worry about Michelin or the Good Food Guide or any of that. So what we've got actually is a really nice environment in our restaurant where people are just thinking about each other and not actually sort of focus on anything else. They're not focused on what the other restaurant down the road thinks of us or what them customers think of us. It's sort of, I try and give everyone confidence that what we're doing is a good job, and that's enough. And I think that's why I've got longevity with Pete, my head chef. We've been working together for 20 years. We worked together back at the vineyard at Stock Cross. When I wasn't in charge, but he's been working with me for all that time. And I've got Steffi and Damien, who are my front of house guys, and Ian, my general manager, and all of them are into like 14, 15 years. Because it's just in that environment. So when we do get younger guys coming in, when they're on that cycle of doing 18 months to 2 years, because that's normally what happens when you're a junior, you're moving around. We just bring them into that environment that, there's a 2-tier thing. And sometimes they come in and they want to stay with us and they become part of that tier. And then you get the guys that are just getting this nice sort of almost like, it's like I suppose it's like an atmosphere that's like you're learning and you're teaching you and you'll get everything. I don't want anybody coming out of my kitchen that, you know, if you employ someone from me, you want them to know that they can fillet a fish, right? Or if there's a bit of a problem or cook some fish. So we just concentrate on giving, you know, younger guys all that sort of, all the teaching and coaching and everything they need. And we look at the areas where they're weak and where they're strong, and tend to try and give them lots of feedback and lots of appraisals and stuff like that. And just to make sure that they come out of our kitchen, if they do decide to leave us, you know, with proud of what they've done, you know. So, but yeah, the accolades, well, you're coming back to your original question with the accolade thing. I don't know. I've just never really seen the pressure of it like that. Yeah, I've just been fortunate. I suppose I'm very fortunate to just achieve the first star at the Black Pig. I suppose got the whole thing rolling by just, I had no time to nose in the restaurant. I was on my own in the kitchen, like with
washing plates as well.
Yeah, exactly. We were doing everything. We had no KP. We never had a KP at the Black Pig at all. Not at all. Yeah, I think we had a couple of guys come in, surfers and stuff, and local. Every so often, they just had such a pain to, like, yeah, because they just weren't focusing on what we were doing. With two guys, it's easy to just do it yourself. So yeah, we've just been very fortunate, with that sort of stuff.
So just to take a step back, because it sounds like the time that you had at Rick's was, I mean, you mentioned in there sort of just glossed over, but you mentioned that you had 3 days off and, you know, you're the constant creative buzz. I mean, what sort of things do you reckon were sort of the key factors within that business that meant that people wanted to stay for so long and continue their journey with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Rick, you mean? I mean, with Rick, I mean, one, it gives you, I mean, it's a very strong business. You know, I mean, obviously recently in the papers it had a few issues because of, like everyone has with the COVID and stuff, but it gives you a solid foundation. You know, you work for Rick Stein, looks good on your CV. He's known all over the world. He's known in Australia. If you want to travel, it gives you lots of opportunity. So I think from a young person or a person starting in their career, it can give you a good sort of foot in the door anywhere all over the world. You know, so you work for Rick Stein. So that's one good thing, I suppose, why people work there. And I think you do get looked after in terms of the money. I mean, it was, when I was there, it was on London levels. Like, you know, so when I came out of London expecting to have a massive pay drop, it was still on the same sort of level. So Rick and Jill, they'd understood that you need to sort of compete at that level, but they could because it was such a busy business, right?
Yeah.
And I think the people that have stayed here, say like Stefan, who's like the executive chef, he's still there now. And I worked with him. He was a sous chef above me and I was the junior sous chef. So he's still there. And I think the reason why someone like that would stay is just because, you know, he's just had so much opportunity while it's been growing. It's a fast growing business. I think, you know, don't get me wrong, people did leave. People did come in and didn't handle that environment because maybe they just didn't have the basics or the understanding or didn't get into that frame of mind. Because there was no getting away from it. The place is a beast. It's busy. Right? That's the one thing. If you were slow, it would be too much. Yeah. And so you did have to move yourself and you had to be very self-managing within. There was no one, with that kitchen, there was no time necessarily for anybody to be coaching you necessarily. Right. You were giving your feedback by presenting a dish to the parts and then they'll say, no, that's bad, or that's good, or that's great. Yeah, there was a certain amount of teaching, but all the recipes were from his books. So they were on the shelf. You know, so you either had a reference, so you go open it and go, that's the book. Any adjustments that were made on them books. So you had like, at the time there's only 3 books. There's Taste of the Sea, Fruits of the Sea, and Seafood Odyssey. They were the 3 books that we were taking most. And then before that, he'd written a book called English Seafood Cookery, which he wrote in the 80s, which is a little paperback. And so the repertoire was based upon those 4 books. So you had good reference. And I'd never experienced that because I'd never worked for a chef. Well, I worked for Gary Rhodes, but the food that was in his books to what was in the restaurant was a bit different. Yeah. So, and he didn't use the books. He didn't have a book. Well, Rick, he'd actually use them. So there's a good advert for it, how good his recipes are, right? So then the people that were in there would coach you because they've been there and done the jobs in a repetitive nature so many times that they knew. So as you were new, you would get onto a section with someone who'd been there a while and they would run you through it as you were working. We hadn't got to a time then where you did forcefully, they probably did appraisals once a year or something like that because it was just someone told you got to do it, that sort of thing. But it was more on the job sort of I'd say old school kitchen, in not in the fact that it was like full on, like violent full on. It was just a old school that everyone knew what your job was. If you didn't fit in, you probably would fall by the wayside. But if you did fit in, you would really enjoy it and you'd have a good time.
So you mentioned appraisals twice now, both in Rick's and also with what you do in terms of how you bring on new chefs. I mean, how important are regular appraisals, and how often do you?
I personally think that they're really important, and especially when you're dealing with a member of staff that's maybe not getting the most out of work in the kitchen or not going in the right direction that you think that they should, because if you can monitor them and you can help them to get to where they want to get. Sometimes people will just get, especially finding the younger chefs that they slightly get, nowadays you get a lot of younger chefs that will come into the kitchen expecting to be big on Instagram, on the TV, have a book deal like pretty quick, right? We don't get as many of those, but every so often you just got to use the appraisal, that 1-to-1, or actually 2-to-1. You never have 1-to-1. We're not allowed to do that anymore. You have to be, all them sort of things. You have to, we always make sure there's 2 people, because you just don't, it's just not worth getting into any of them areas of problems. You know what I mean?
Oh, really?
So we do it because we had it was like about 10 years ago. There was an incident where I was 1-to-1 with someone, and you just get it, unless you have monitored those meetings, sometimes people just don't take what you say to them in the right context, and they can get it in the wrong way. Yeah. So we always have 2 members with that individual. If they want one-on-ones, we do one-on-ones as well, but we just make sure that it's a team that know about what's going on with the person, not necessarily ones. Obviously, personal stuff, that's different, but we're talking about developing them as chefs or developing them as front of house. So, I mean, the way the appraisals are important is because you can monitor the progress and you can help people get to where they want to. And I think it's important for younger chefs, especially ones that are a bit nervous or ones that maybe have sort of learning difficulties. We've had people with autistic and stuff like that, and it really helps them keep them on the track of what we expect from them, and what they expect from us, and explain. Sometimes you need to explain things in a different way for different people. I once had this, again, probably about 10 years ago now. We had a management company come in to sort of like help us with that sort of thing. By halfway through, I just got rid of them because they weren't doing it right. I hired them in to actually help us with that, but actually they said you need to manage everybody the same way, and I just went, this is not right. And the half time when we had like the thing, I said that you might as well I think what you're saying is wrong for this industry. It's because it was an appraisal company that just probably do office workers or different things, just different thing. Whereas kitchens are completely different, or restaurants are completely different. Hospitality. I believe you have to manage. You have certain people that can take pressure, certain people that can't take pressure. But I always believe you can get the best out of anybody, and I think the appraisals is a good way to do that.
I like what you say about being the fact that everyone is individuals within the kitchen environment. We often hear about ruling by fear and treating everyone with the same brush. And if they can't keep up, then, the person next door to them can do it. So why can't they? But hospitality is such a diverse bunch of individuals with their own ideas, their own influences, their own abilities to learn in different ways. So I think you are 100% right. And to try and, it's refreshing to hear that you brought in a management company and like, nah, actually, do you know what? Go away. Yeah, I can do it better. It brings me on actually to something I'm hoping to get Jay Morton on the podcast from SAS Who Dares Wins.
Yeah.
Cool. I was listening to one of his books fairly recently, and he talks about leadership as part of the SAS. And obviously, as we know, the Escoffier system is fairly, it's a military-based system, and I think that's sometimes taken out of context. But they operate to 4 different standards, which is humility, the relentless pursuit of excellence, a classless society, which means that everyone is, individual and unique in their own ways, and a sense of humor. And I started to look at whether or not we could adapt that and say, well, actually, right, you like the military system within a kitchen environment. How about now let's elevate you? Why aren't you the SAS? Starting to adapt that into a management style.
I mean, everything them 4 points are definitely all part of what makes it successful in that environment, and certainly produces a good teamwork. That's the thing. I think that's the one thing, is that it's not a place for individuals in that sense, like the egotistical individual. It's like, if you want a successful restaurant, it's about, I believe it's everyone knowing what they need to do, and sort of like giving the tools to be able to do that, and then making sure that it all works together. And it's all about being organized. I think any sort of point in my career where it's got hot, heated, or kitchens that are crazy. It's all down to organisation. Every single time. I give an example of any of these sort of places where service has gone to pot, or someone's gone down in a section, or it's always down to the organisation. So we always spend so much time on getting stuff done before you get into that zone where you can't control it. And that's the thing. And I do believe there is chefs out there that like to have that as part of their kitchen. They like to not force the organisation so that it's a bit crazy. I've definitely worked with chefs that would rather not tell you that there's a vegetarian on table one, just to tell you that check on there's one vegetarian and you don't know about it. But they could have told you 10 minutes ago and you could have got organised for it. Because I suppose you have craziness and you have organised spaces, don't you? I suppose the organised space could get so organised that it just becomes boring. And actually, I've gone through that. I mean, one of the reasons why I changed restaurant Nathan Outlaw to Outlaws New Road is because it became systematic. It became cooked by number because it was so consistent. So therefore, there was no jeopardy in what we were doing. So I think there is people that like to throw the jeopardy into a service. So it does make it a bit crazy. That's fine to a certain extent, I suppose, but it's when it goes completely wrong and then it boils over and people start getting violent, start getting abusive and start shouting and doing and hurting people's feelings, right? It's putting jeopardy into something. I think there's jeopardy enough not knowing what people are going to order. See, you've got 20 customers coming, you ain't got a clue what they're going to order. That's jeopardy. That's enough for me. I don't need anything else to go wrong. But whereas like when you've got tasting menu restaurant like Restaurant Nathan Outlaw was, where it's just one straightforward menu, there was no jeopardy in the order, apart from gluten-free, dairy-free, all that sort of stuff. But we knew all about that probably 80-90% of the time because we got that information before they even arrived. So it becomes so systematic and so thingy that actually the service is like there's nothing going on. It's just like cooking, and I can see where it can become a bit boring. So I suppose if you are of the nature as a chef or as a restaurant manager where you like to be a bit crazy, then you leave them bits out, don't you? That's the sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's okay if you're a leader and you jump in and help and shit hits the fan because you're not able to cope with it. But yeah, if you're just sat there smirking and going, you're going down and there's no stopping you now. Yeah, that's a completely different way of doing things. But
for me, it's all about organisation. I think I'd much rather just have a nice, easier day than one that's crazy like that.
You're going to have a sort of a barrage of applications coming through for the summer. So get ready. It's going to be young chefs who are looking at lifestyle change and to work for a decent level. So yeah, the email address is. But I mean, obviously this podcast is all about trying to. I'm personally intrigued about the leadership styles and what makes a good kitchen and what makes a good business work as well, because obviously we've got to bear in mind that whilst the Burnt Chef project leads itself towards chefs, mental health. Affects everyone on the planet, irrespective back of house, front of house, whether you're a bus driver or what. And one way that I'm sort of challenging the perceptions of mental health is asking people to talk about their own experiences quite openly. Yeah. And throughout your career, one of the questions we get asked a lot by colleges is, we never see anyone or we never hear anyone talk about a difficult time and the impact and the thoughts that were going through their head and how that might have physically manifested in themselves. And I'm getting a real sense from colleges at the moment that they could be a benefit from people like yourself being able to say, actually, do you know what? Yeah, it was a tough time opening up my restaurant and here's the impact it had on me. I appreciate that sometimes that's not always the case and some people are more susceptible to struggling than others. But I wondered if you had any sort of experiences that you might be able to share to normalize this a little bit.
There's two, really. I mean, in my career, I've been fortunate enough to, like I say, being pretty positive and sort of always believed in me, myself, and I can achieve. But the earlier point, which was probably more, I suppose, important for college students and stuff, was I suppose when I went to Gary Rose that first time, that really knocked me for six in terms of being a young chef and not really sort of knowing what the hell's going on. And that was really down to a lack of preparation on my own part, but probably just an expectation as well that it was all going to be like it was on the telly with Gary Rhodes, and I think that is, that's one thing I would say for any advice for a young chef coming into the industry is like, you got to understand that what you see on the television and what you pick up in your bookshop and all that sort of stuff, and you see in magazines, is because those guys 9 times out of 10 have worked their asses off to get to that, or got an opportunity to do that. So it just doesn't happen overnight. And if you're that 1%, like you say, like someone like Jamie, even Jamie, who's a good friend of mine, worked his ass off before he became the chef that we all know on television. You know, he worked hard in River Cafe, he worked hard with Gennaro and stuff. So, you know, that is one thing. I suppose, and that's from a personal point of view, I fell into that trap going to Gary Rhodes and thinking it was going to be like working on telly with him. It wasn't. So that's one thing. And I think the impact of that, and not realizing how much it would be like that, it put me into a position where quite depressed, quite, you know, it knocked my confidence. And I was lucky and fortunate enough to be able to go back to work for Peter Kronberg at the Intercontinental and have that route to go back. But at that point, I was thinking of giving up about being chef and thinking of going, you know, I can remember it like, you know, we're talking well over 20 years ago, and I can still remember that point when I walked through those doors and said, I'm not doing it anymore. Yeah. Didn't turn up the next day. You know, and for a long time, it was sort of played in my mind to the point of having dreams about it, you know, like sort of what would have done if I'd stayed there and stuff like that. So, but looking back at it now, I think it is all down to preparation and expectation on myself. So, and everybody that I spoke to about going to work there were all like excited from a point of view, oh, he's the guy off the telly. Yeah, it's going to be great. So that was one thing. The second thing, like, definitely is more recent, you know, and very much so when the COVID happened, I'd already been having quite negative thoughts and quite sort of, I suppose, thoughts about being a chef. And that was because I worked to get all the opportunities that I'd had. So let's say I started probably about 6 years ago. I had both my restaurants in Port Isaac, which were doing very well. We had the Mariners pub in Rock, which was doing very, very well. I'd opened my restaurant in Dubai, the Burj Al Arab Hotel, best hotel in the world on paper. And we'd had the Capital Hotel as well. And so when I was flying around, not really thinking about life and just getting on with my job, because I had to, because I was going everywhere, I sort of, I was in a zone where I was just, everything was great and going well. But roll on, you know, the early part of this year, you know, all that's gone. And that was quite, I think, actually shocked me a bit, because all of those opportunities in terms of, I decided to move from the Capital to the Goring, but in terms of the Dubai restaurant and the Mariners, all three of those sort of opportunities were sort of like taken away at that point, from my point of view, because I'd worked so hard for all those things. It made a big shock. It took, you know, it really sort of impacted me sort of mentally, because I was just thought, what's the point? You know, because we've worked super hard to do all this, and not realizing it. I didn't realize at the time that was the case, but I knew that I weren't right, and I knew that it didn't feel, I wasn't enjoying being in the kitchen. I wasn't enjoying cooking. Didn't want to do it. I was more interested in actually being in my garden and doing the gardening and being at home. And I think what saved that and what gave me time to actually reassess everything and rethink was the first lockdown. And I started the first lockdown by telling and being part of telling 20 staff that they'd lost their jobs at the Goring and at the Siren restaurant. That weren't very nice to do, and that weren't very nice to be part of, and that was quite hard. And it's hard for all them guys, obviously, but from my point of view, when you tell people they've got the security of a job and they're under your banner with a hotel group and you've got everything safe, and then that's just all gone out of your control, that has an impact on you as well. So that, you know, coming back from London after telling them and then coming back to a lockdown, because that's when it started, and then being just down to my 2 restaurants in Port Isaac knowing that they can't be open, it was sort of like, it was a bit like, what else can go wrong? Do you know what I mean? It's the sort of thing like that. And this was also, they hadn't announced the furlough, and I'd never even heard of furlough, obviously, because that's never happened before. No. So I just thought, right, I've got 2 months, 3 months at max, and I've lost my business. I've lost everything. Like, I've gone from having 5 places, you know, globe trotting, I suppose you're going to call it, doing different things, to nothing. So I think in those first couple of weeks until they announced the furlough system, how it was going to work, it was just, I think that's probably the lowest point of, what, you know, a career. And I think it had an impact on personally with like the way I was with the family and the kids and stuff like that. So that was, not in a nasty way, it's just I was very quiet, and that's not me. I'm not a quiet person. But then, as you do, I mean, I'm lucky enough to, talk it through with, my wife, and we conversations and stuff. And because we were locked down, there was no one else to talk to apart from people on the phone. But I don't really have a relationship with anybody like that, So I just worked out for myself that what I needed to do was to change. So that's really why I hadn't felt that Restaurant Nathan Outlaw was right for probably 2-3 years. Like I said before, we were talking about it was just becoming very cook by number. And the reason why that worked for me then was because I was busy with everything else. I was going to London every fortnight. I was going to Dubai every 6 weeks, So to actually have a restaurant that just, I knew it was doing what it needed to do was fine. Yeah. But now I was in a different position. I was like, right, I'm getting back in the kitchen, and which is what I've done. So I need to I need to mix it up a bit. So yeah, we got the little fish kitchen, which is actually, it's got Michelin-starred as well, but we never really talk about it. No one really knows he's got it. That's sort of doing well. So there's no reason to change that. But I knew we needed to mix that up a bit, and I needed to give myself some new challenges. So changing it to Outlaw's New Road, going against what everybody said. Why you shut in number 1 restaurant in the country and 2 Michelin-star restaurant. I think a few people think I was a bit mad, but I just needed to create a challenge again. So I think coming that full circle, I mean, from going that first couple of weeks of lockdown thinking I've had enough for chefing, actually seriously looking into being a gardener and doing gardening and stuff like that, and stopping it completely, and thinking to myself, I've written a few books. I'll probably keep things going by writing a few cookery books. Maybe I'll do, Instagram video. I know all these sort of things. You think you can, if you're on your own and you've not got 30 staff below you that you got to pay as well, you could probably you could get through, and you could make things work. But having a good think about it and knowing what I still love cooking and I still love what I do. So, but I knew that I needed to change it, and that's why we changed to Outlaw's New Road. There's no other reason really, other than just making it more fun when we're working there, making it more of a challenge working there. We opened up more services. We do more covers, although we do in sit-ins now, instead of it being you have it for your table for the whole lunch or for the whole dinner. With the social distancing, we've only got 5 tables upstairs and we've only got 3 on the bar. So we had to think about it from a business point of view. So now we do 2 sit-ins in each service. So, it's busy. We can do 70 to 80 cover days, where before we were doing 20, 22, 24, something like that, like maximum a day. So it's really changed the whole thing. And that's why when Michelin came out a few weeks ago, I wasn't even in that zone. I was like, it's not even there, and then to be awarded and stuff, we were like, oh, it's like, okay, it's great, but I was like, it's not what we were aiming for. It's sort of like a restaurant where we just wanted it to be a busy restaurant, which is cooking with no rules. Yeah. Didn't want to be put into them constraints. Having to, you must have tablecloths, you're a Michelin-starred, all that sort of stuff. But, it is what it is. And I've sort of separated myself from that, and I just focus on the restaurants. So right now, as I sit here, I feel better than I have done for a long, long time, and actually feel excited about the future, about actually getting back in the kitchen and developing new dishes, hopefully bringing on new customers, because the restaurant's gone down in price. So we've opened up to a new audience, right? So it's going to be nice to have lots of different people coming through the door. And I know the chefs have enjoyed it, and I know the front of house have enjoyed it because they're busier and they fill their days with being busy. And I think people like being busy, albeit we all just at the moment just want to get back to it and open up.
Thank you, firstly, for sharing, because I appreciate that the stigma is still so strong in our industry that sometimes it might be difficult for certain individuals. So thank you for that. But I find it interesting, within the first couple of minutes, you were talking about how you're quite a creative being, and you like, especially with your drawing and challenging yourself, and you found a way out of feeling quite negative and depressed by creating creativity back in your life again in a different format. And whilst we're not able to cook and create new dishes necessarily, it's a whole different type of creativity. I resonate with that. That's much the same for myself.
Yeah, I'm just a person that probably think too much, but I do need that time to think. I think, and that's, some people can clear their mind that way. Some people probably can't. It's a different thing. But for me, that works, to being able to just sort of take us. I've learned actually over the years that I used to just jump straight in and make decisions and say yes or no or whatever. Now I won't ever make a decision for a good week before, anything that's serious. I'll sit back and really think about it and talk to my wife about it. She probably the one person that sort of knows. She's the one person that knows me inside out. Out of anybody, so I think that keeps my feet firmly on the ground, which is quite, if you can have someone like that in your life, it doesn't have to be your wife, but someone you can trust and someone you can talk to. I think you should talk to about it. Yeah. You tell me, so you need someone that will turn around to you and tell you talking shit.
Yeah, much like my wife, about every day. Yeah, you do. You need someone who can be quite frank with you, because if you get handed to, especially.
So I'm a bit of a dreamer. I'm a bit of a. I've got all these ideas, and sometimes you need someone to just rein you in for that little bit. So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, true. But also at the same time, I think there's nothing wrong with dreaming, because it's all very well and good dreaming. But I think if you're the sort of person who can actually pull the trigger and turn those dreams, or at least start on the road to turning those dreams to reality, then you know what? Sometimes it takes, have to scale it back a bit and look at it. Yeah, I mean, Christ, if it wasn't for dreaming, we wouldn't have started businesses that bring change to people's lives through either food or open conversation. So you have to. One thing I've always asked my guests, and you've made some absolutely cracking points so far, but it's a bit of a curveball question, which is, if you were to give some advice to a younger version of yourself, what sort of advice and what sort of things would you see yourself?
Well, I'd say the only thing that I haven't done, because I was so focused in cooking, was travel. I still haven't. Everything I travel to is to cook. It's never to go and to enjoy it. So, one thing from my own self would be to sort of experience a bit more of other cultures in a different part of the world. And, really, but in terms of what I've done, because I don't think I'd change any of it. I actually think that the journey so far of what I've done, I've always walked my own path. I've never done what people tell me to do. And I think that's seen me well. So I suppose the advice would be to my young self is take more risks and take more challenges on board. And there's a few things that I should have just gone for and didn't do. So I'm a great believer in that when you do something wrong, it's not a mistake the first time. It's only a mistake the second time. So you can't make mistakes by having a go at something. And I think so. If I didn't have that attitude, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now, because I would still be back in Kent, probably doing something there, and never would have enjoyed that whole journey of what I've done so far. I just believe it's still the beginning now anyway. I've not even started yet. I think that's what you got to think.
Love it. I love it. I'm intrigued to see what's next, and who knows what the next couple of years will bring. Yeah. But I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the fact that you've spoken so openly and frankly as well. And, for anyone that is listening, I hope you've enjoyed it too. But also at the same time, we've just launched the Burnt Chef support service. So if people are struggling with who they can talk to in their life, then text that number. It's free 24/7, even after a late service. And it just helps provide a bit of clarity and someone to not necessarily tell you you're talking shit. You need a wife or a husband for that. But it certainly helps just put things into perspective. So Nathan, thank you ever so much for that.
Lovely to speak to you, Kris. Thanks a lot.
You too, my friend. Speak soon.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.